I'll confess that most of what I knew about Charlie and his story was from what he shared in group discussions and his teachings on Friday nights at Rivers Crossing Celebrate Recovery. He and I had only a handful of meaningful conversations. What I knew of him, I learned from the many relationships I have with others who had been profoundly influenced by him, his story, his teachings, his guidance, his grace, his honesty, his brokenness, his healing, his openness, and his friendship. At his memorial service and celebration of life, I was mesmerized by the number of people in attendance, a testament to the true impact a single man who can make in this world, especially if called to follow God's will. Father figure, mentor, friend, sponsor, brother, and the seemingly universal old man were repeatedly used in describing who and what Charlie was to so many. He shared his rescue from a wretched life full of pain, despair, shame, anger, and resentment, and couldn't keep his experience, strength, and hope a secret. He burned with a fire to tell others of the grace he'd not only received but accepted. How surrender was the way to victory over his hurts, habits, and hang-ups, and how dying to self was the only way to finally vanquish the demons that haunted him. But the old man took no credit save for showing up and having a shred of willingness to be rid of feeling the dread of loneliness and the emptiness and worthlessness of shame. He gave credit to those who came before him in the programs of recovery, they who laid the foundations of the road work that we who came later found as paved paths of progress, proven process to freedom. The old man always praised his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, whose merciful redemption allowed the Holy Spirit to eventually take residence within a heart that ached to simply be loved as it was. I think many of us reach a point in our lives where we wonder if we'll be able to leave a legacy, a lasting impression on those around us. A sense that while we were here on this earth, we did something good in it. And I think all of us pondering that question should look to someone like Charlie and conclude that if we could leave half the mark that man did, the old man, we will leave this place undeniably better than how we found it. At the Recovery Podcast, we understand that this may be a tough episode, but we couldn't think of a better way to honor Charlie on the anniversary of his passing than to bring in some of the guys he impacted with the most to share who Charlie was to them. So without further wait, welcome to episode 14, Charley Hartman.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Recovery Podcast. This is going to be a special one, and one that I've looked forward to for a really long time, and it's going to be a tough one to get through for the people involved, and I think it might be tough for some of you listening as well. But it's something that absolutely should be done, and before I get too far into that, let me just kind of get my housekeeping out of the way so we can dive in head first. And as we always state, while we definitely do encourage everybody who's on the podcast to share from their recovery, share from their experience with whatever recovery program they're a part of, nobody is a spokesperson or representative of the recovery program that they choose to speak from. It's because we're all fallible. We can all go back out. And that doesn't mean that the programs don't work. It means that we didn't work the program. And I feel pretty confident in speaking that most people, I think everybody on this podcast would agree with that sentiment. But the other thing is, if you would like to support the podcast, whatever avenue of engagement that the platform that you listen on has, whether it be liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing, rating, whatever it is, please, if you would like to support the podcast, that is the biggest way. There's definitely a correlation that the more engagement that each one of these episodes has, it's crazy how many more people see it. So I would really appreciate it. And on the flip side of that, thank you to everybody who who has supported, whether through the social media engagement that I just talked about, or just coming up to me in person and telling me what the episodes meant to you. I was actually sharing without names, with anonymity and confidentiality, some of the things that some of you guys have shared. I didn't mention anybody specifically, so don't worry. I don't want to discourage anybody. But what it's meant the world to me, and you have no idea how much hope and encouragement that offers me and the people that I relay that feedback to. It means a lot to us. So thank you. What makes this episode special is that the person this episode is for is no longer with us, but is somebody that left a massive impact, left such a huge mark on so many in the recovery community, and that being Charley Hartman. My personal experience, Charley was my sponsor for a short while. Somebody that, even though my time with him was relatively short, he left a impact. He left a mark on me. And the people I'm joined by today are people that have already been on the podcast, but that were his sponsees, and they didn't even hesitate to be a part of this, because I think that it's important to share the impact that he had. So those two people that are sitting across from me right now are Daryl Wilson and Austin Funk. And if you haven't listened to their episodes, I highly recommend it, because they're two of my favorites in TRP in general, and powerful stuff. But I'll leave the introductions up to them. So let's start with you, Austin, and then we'll pass on to you, Daryl. Just tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself before we really get rolling.
What's up, everybody? It's a pleasure to be back on here. Thank you, Matt, for putting this on, for having us today. My name is Austin. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. And I'm in recovery for drug and alcohol addiction. I struggle with lust, anger, codependency, and mental illness.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. My name is Daryl. I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I have struggled in the past with addiction and currently struggling with codependency and grief. And I echo Austin. I really appreciate you doing this episode. I appreciate this podcast in general, because I think it is carrying a message of hope that needs to get out there. And I think I'm anxious to shine a light on our friend and dear brother who always shined the light towards Jesus. So,
yeah, thank you guys for both for being on. And it's I was sharing before, like I said, the podcast. It's been crazy. The people that have come up to me, a lot of them aren't the people I expected, in the sense that they're not in a program. Like, maybe they love somebody who's in recovery or in current addiction, or maybe they just have had trauma or some sort of something going on that maybe they didn't ever consider recovery, like a program or a fellowship like CR or the like, as a way to an avenue to work through it. And man, like the stories that, like what you guys have shared, you two specifically, have people have come up to me and talked about it. So I think it's just apropos that you're here. So let's talk about Charley. For a lot of people that are listening to this, they probably know who Charley is, but not everybody. So let's say if you could describe Charley, how would you guys describe Charley?
Oh, man.
There's a lot of smiles in this room right now.
I told him this before. I said, whenever I describe you, Charley, I said, I always describe you as one half koala bear, because you're so lovable, and one half Oscar the Grouch. Because he just didn't.
And also as tall as Big Bird.
Right, and as tall as Big Bird. Yeah, exactly.
That too. Man, the first word, that's interesting you say that, Daryl, because the first words that came into my head were abrasive and then gentle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he had both of those sides and could operate in both of those kind of spaces whenever the time was right. But whenever I talk about Charley, I just said this big old dude from New York, this thick accent, looked mean, and he was really loud.
Yep. Maybe the only
Man.
person I know that could be louder than Mitch.
Yeah,
Right.
Who's my sponsor.
yeah,
That's saying something.
true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to be, it's, as I was thinking about how we were going to do this episode, one of the things I ran into is like, I know a little bit about Charley and his background, but I don't know if I remember everything. He told me a lot, but Charley was a huge part of Celebrate Recovery, AA, but definitely towards, I would say, I don't know how many years, but for multiples of years before his passing, definitely huge in CR. And I know, I think alcohol was his main vice, and he told me some of the crazy stories of his addiction. And again, like, it wasn't what's crazy when I think about Charley is you almost forget, because of the impact that he had in recovery. You almost forget that there was a past before that. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because when you met Charley, you didn't think, you just thought it wasn't his past, it wasn't his pain that came forward. It was the hope that he offered, it was like you guys said. It was, I like that comment about abrasive and gentle, being that he was tough and he was very direct, but he had this way of offering up hope and doing it in a way that was, it needed no packaging. It needed no introduction. He said it, he gave it to you, and it was exactly what you needed to hear. And so, for you guys were both his sponsees. Kind of talk me through what that process was like of getting to know Charley and then asking him to be your sponsor, and what that looked like for each of you. Whoever wants to start.
I'll go first. I wanted to chime in there real quick. One of the things that Charley always used to say was, if you love a man, tell him the truth. And I feel like he embodied that, because he loved people and he loved them deeply.
Yes, he did.
And he told them the truth, whether they liked it or not. And that's a very difficult quality and character.
It's because it's not hard.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily hard to tell the truth. It can be, but it's hard to tell the truth in love and in a way that somebody knows, especially about something difficult.
Yeah.
That they can receive it and know that, like, this might not be what I want to hear right now, but I know you're saying this because you love me. And that is absolutely something that I recognize. And I know it's something you both experienced. What was that process like for you? Where were you at in your life when Charley came to be a part of it?
So I don't remember exactly the first time that I met him, but I was in and out of the rooms for years. Not really in a place of surrender quite yet. But I remember when they launched CR at Rivers Crossing, and I was there the first night. My mom took me there, and we started going. And it was on St. Patrick's Day in 2017 is when they launched. And so I was going for a few weeks, and Charley was there, and he was one of the people that helped kind of launch it. And I was in this place at that point. It was like the most miserable I'd ever been in my using. It wasn't because I was doing the most drugs that I'd ever done or anything like that, but it was because I had a period of sobriety for about 8 months, and I went back out earlier that year in January. And so fast forward a couple months, and we're in March, and I was going through it, man. And I was spiritually empty, bankrupt. I was struggling mentally, emotionally, all that. And it was at that point where, like, drugs and alcohol weren't solving the problems like they used to solve the problems. And I knew that there was a better way. And so I was going to these meetings, and Charley was in there, man, and he just, every single week, like, every time he opened his mouth, I just felt this draw to him. because he was fired up all the time. And it scared some people. It made some people uncomfortable. It kind of was like, what is this guy's problem? Like, why is he just here preaching at everybody? But dude, there was something in him that it got my attention and it made me want to listen. Like, what this guy has to say is something that I need to hear. I better pay attention. And I'd been in groups with him and stuff before, but I guess I was never really in a place to receive. And so anyways, fast forward to about April 8th. It was another Friday night, and I talked about this on the previous episode. I won't go into all the details, but I was at that meeting on a Friday night, and I knew that if I didn't tell on myself while I was at that meeting, I was going to go home and drink. And at that meeting, I was sitting there and was convicted by the Spirit of God to ask Charley to be my sponsor. Because I had never had a sponsor up until that point. I'd been coming in and out of recovery meetings since I was 15. I was 21 at that point. So I'd never had a sponsor. I'd never worked the steps all the way through. I'd never done any of that. But I knew that night I was supposed to ask Charley, and I didn't do it. I didn't go up to him. I didn't get his phone number. No, I had his phone number. I didn't go up to him and ask him that question. And so that next day I went out. I drank that night, drank all night, went out and overdosed the next day. And he was the first person I called. And I was broken, man. I was desperate. I was just beat down. I was at the end of myself. I had no more plan Bs. I had no more options. I was done doing it my way. And I made that phone call. And I think he said something to the effect of, "It's about damn time." And I mean, dude, I'm like a mess. I'm crying. He's just like, "I've been watching you for years, Red. I was wondering when you're gonna get your head out of your ass." And like, just like that. But for whatever reason, I was just like, man, that was comforting to me in that moment. That like, he was just waiting. He was just waiting. And he was like, absolutely. He's like, I will be there for you. Here's what I want you to do. Call me every day. We're going to meet tomorrow. Do you have a big book? No, I don't have a big book. I'll get you a big book. We're going to meet tomorrow. And from that point, I mean, it started. I called him at least 5 times every single week for over 5 years. And he just scooped me up. He just scooped me up, and he showed me how to be a man. He showed me how to grow up, to take responsibility. And we'll get into some of that later. But that was how I met him. I mean, I was just done and broken, and he was just there smiling. I mean, he was like laughing at me on the phone as I'm sitting there crying, and he's just like, all right, so you're done? You're ready? I'm like, yeah, man, I'm ready. All right, I can work with that. And I always talk about that in my testimony. Like, I was broken, desperate. And he said, that's good. That's the best way. It's the best way you can be.
I mean, there's something to say about, yeah, as you're telling me this, I'm getting goosebumps. And I didn't have that experience with Charley. I wasn't ready when I asked Charley to be my sponsor. But I had people come up to me after I got sober who were like, "We knew you get it," and I'm kind of projecting a little bit here, maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I got probably the same hope from that as you got when he's like, "I was wondering when you were going to come around," because for some people that might sound judgmental, but you got to understand where we are when we get to that, when we finally truly get to the end of ourselves and we're ready to ask for help. The fact that somebody was like, "We knew you'd come around," tells me what that told me was that people had hope for me when I had no hope for myself. Yeah. And it meant a lot from somebody who was in recovery, the people that were in recovery, because those people know what it's like. And I thought I was so terminally unique that I was never going to be saved.
Yeah.
And I think all of us have felt that way. Most of us felt that way. We felt like there was no, maybe not everybody, but I know I did. And I having the luxury of hearing your story and talking about it on the podcast, I know you were too, where you're just like, I don't see any way out. And for somebody, when somebody's like, good, we got you, man, you're in the right place.
Yeah.
It gives you hope it provides hope for you that you can't provide for yourself. And I mean, it's almost like when you watch those like war movies, and then like you've got like the new cadet who's seeing battle for the first time, and they're like terrified, shit's blowing up around him, and they're like, and then like there's that one dude who's been there, and he's like, "Follow me, son, we're getting out of here," or whatever. Like, and then it's just that's the way those people, and not just Charley, but anybody in recovery, who there's certain people. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I feel like there are certain people in recovery that just have this like. They have this eye for people, for catching the people, and I think it's inspired. I think it's a God thing, that it's like they can look out into a crowd of people at a recovery meeting and they can see the people that are the most broken but are almost ready. You know what I'm saying? Like that dude's going to come around, or that girl, like that person's going to come around, and when they're ready, I'm going to be here. And
he always used to say, "Strike while the iron's hot."
Right.
This is years down the road when I start sponsoring guys. He's just like, you got to keep your eyes open and strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah.
And when you see that moment when they're ready, be there. Go into the trenches.
Yeah, man. And I cannot tell you how vital those people are in recovery. Yeah. I mean, we have people at every recovery meeting. I know there are people at Rivers Crossing like that. And everywhere I go, that the other recovery programs I've been, there's always somebody like that. There's always somebody like that reminds me. They have that same kind of spirit that Charley had, of like they just almost like they're like the shepherds. Like they're like, we're gonna bring, when this person's ready, we're gonna make sure that we're ready to take them in. So I actually haven't heard your experience with Charley and how that came to be. So what was your experience with Charley, and like when did you first meet him, and when did he become your sponsor, and where were you at in your life, Daryl?
I'm glad you said that, because I was wondering on the way here if I had told that story, because
I don't think you did.
Charley's story and my story so intertwined with each other in such a way that it was unmistakably God. And I've always said that Charley Hartman was the answer to one of the most ridiculous prayers that I think I'd ever prayed. And so just to back up a little bit, so I'd gotten clean and sober years before.
Right.
I had been in a long-term marriage, 32 years, and it was coming apart, and there was nothing that I could do to save it. And my plan up until that point in my life had been to, work until I was in my mid-50s, doing what I have to do to make a living, and then I was going to stop doing that, and I was going to do what I wanted to do to make a living. Ministry was going to be part of that. And then in an effort to kind of save that marriage, it ultimately ended up failing. My ex-wife and I had bought a farm. So I just assumed that farming and ministry was going to be what I would be spending the rest of my life for. And I was even actually pursuing enrollment at Dallas Theological Seminary, because I was going to go, get trained and, the whole 9 yards. And then the marriage fell apart. And so I was, I was hurting. And that's when I had heard about this thing called Celebrate Recovery. So I started going, actually before my wife left. I was attending CR because I was actually in a step study when she the day that she moved out. I remember coming in and announcing that she had left. And so I was about as broken, I think, as I'd ever been at that point, and was going through the step study. It was starting to help. But CR up in Wilmington, it was starting to fall apart. All the leaders had, quit. We was down to one female leader, which is not really how you're supposed to be doing step studies and stuff. But so one of the pastors asked me if I would be interested in taking over the ministry? And I remember I said, absolutely not. I said, I'm the most broken person I know right now. I can't lead any ministry. And, but God had different ideas with that. And so,
He often does.
yeah, right. And so once God started giving me a vision for it, the first thing I realized is that I need to start going around and visiting other CRs. I'd been in AA and NA for years before that. And CR was just weird when I first came because it was nothing like AA and NA. There was like the small group part, there's like AA or NA, but the large group part, I wasn't expecting that at all, Right. And so I looked up other CRs and at the time I was at the fourth step. I was completing a fourth step, and I knew that fifth step was coming, where you share with, God and yourself and another human being the exact nature of your wrongs. And I didn't know who I was going to share that with. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that I might have to go back, dig up one of my old AA sponsors from years ago. I mean, I was 25 years clean and sober at this point. And so I prayed that what I thought was the most ridiculous prayer is, God, if you can show me somebody who can be a sponsor to me in CR, in a program that didn't even exist when I got clean and sober, So I thought that was a pretty ridiculous prayer. And the Village Church was the first CR that I visited outside of the one that I had been attending in Wilmington. And I prayed that prayer on the way here. And in small group, I remember when it was my turn to share, I said, well, I've been clean and sober for, many years, and I'm just going through a, pretty painful divorce. And so that's why I'm here. The guy next to me said, well, I've been clean and sober for many years, and I'm going through a divorce as well. And he was a older guy, and so I struck up a conversation with him afterwards. And so I asked him, I said, what year did you, and it was Charley that I was talking to. I said, what year did you get clean and sober? And he said, 1990. And I said, oh my gosh, so did I. January 24th, 1990 is when I had my last, 23rd is the last drink and drug. 24th was my first day of sobriety. And I said, and remember, I'm here because of a divorce. And so I said, what's your sobriety date? And he said, May 16th. And I said, oh my gosh, that was my wedding anniversary.
Holy cow.
Oh, man.
I don't know how many neon signs you would have to show me.
Here's your sign.
Yeah. And then I discovered that, he was up here. He had come up here he was married at the time when I met him, and he was going through a divorce. He'd come up here to help plant a church. The church had exploded and, just failed in spectacular fashion. And everybody went back to Lexington, where he came from, or I think he was from Danville, actually, but I think he lived in Lexington before here. And I remember one of the first things I remember him saying is that I know God told me to come up here. And I thought it was to plant this church. But apparently that's not the case, and I'm going to stay here. And he told me that people were trying to get him to come back to Lexington. He had no idea what his purpose was here, but he said, I'm going to stay here until I figure out why God called me up here. And that resonates in my mind today of him saying that, because he said that numerous times, because people were always trying to get him to come back. And so here I had thought that I was going into ministry and that I was going to do this. That failed spectacularly. He thought he was doing this thing, and that failed spectacularly. And we both wound up being involved in CR. And it struck me at his funeral. I remember sitting there and looking at Rivers Crossing Community Church in Mason, Ohio, and that place was packed. And there had been people coming in and out the entire time, but then during the service, I mean, at least the bottom floor was packed. I didn't see what the balcony, if there's anybody up there, but that place was packed. And it struck me that here's a guy that has only been in this city for 5 years and didn't know anybody. I think one person stayed up here, and it was Kristen, who led the celebration place for many years at Rivers Crossing. I think that was really it. And he's trying to figure out what God's plan is. And I think it was Jeff Sharp that said, you need to go over and check out this thing at this Celebrate Recovery that they're doing over at the Village Church. And so we both wound up showing up at the same time. And I remember I asked him that day when he said what his sobriety date was, it was like, okay, this is the guy. And so I said, man, I'm working through a 4-step. Would you consider being my sponsor? Because I need somebody to read a 5th step to. And he said, I'm new here too. I'm not sure how it works in CR. So I'll have to ask my CR sponsor, who I think was maybe Randy Holly. I'm not sure who his sponsor was. I think it was Randy. Yeah. And so the next week I was hopeful, because I didn't know how it worked either. And so I'm hopeful. I mean, this is the guy that I want. And I'll never forget, he was leaning up against the wall here in the hallway. And I walked in and I kind of, with my eyes kind of like, are we good? And he gave me the thumbs up, And so that's how I met Charley Hartman.
It's crazy, man. That is just wild.
That is.
And so, what did it look like as you guys started working together? How did that relationship unfold between you guys? And because I got the sense that you guys, and as it usually is with, not always, but like with me, Mitch is my sponsor, but he quickly became a friend to both Kyle and I, who are, to the point now that we often meet together with Mitch and or would just hang out and whatever. So I kind of got that same sense between you and Charley, that you guys were friends and that as well. And so how did that relationship kind of develop with you guys from that?
Well, I mean, he was my best friend. I mean, I considered him my best friend, and he was the guy that I would call when the wheels started coming off. And the wheels, even after I was in recovery, the wheels come off several times, and he was the guy that I would always go to. It's funny because, Austin, as you were talking, I really got the sense that not just with you, but with a lot of the guys that he sponsored, that he was like a father figure. And I've even heard you say that.
Oh, yeah.
And but with me, he was 10 years older than me, but he was like the big brother that I never had. Because I was the oldest of 4 boys, and so I never had a big brother. Charley was my big brother. He was the guy that I went to when it's like, how do you do this?
Yeah, Mitch feels that way a lot for me. Like he definitely. So I definitely could see that, but I didn't mean to interrupt you there, man. Sorry. No,
that was it. So our relationship, I was almost done with an inventory when I met him.
Right.
So, I remember sitting on my deck and going through the inventory, and I remember him pushing back on some things, and I remember me sometimes taking that well and sometimes not taking it well, and arguing with him, and he'd if he felt like he was right, he'd argue back, So there's one thing you never wondered about Charley, is what he was thinking.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because he would share his opinions with you.
Yeah, man. So that man. Yeah, there's something special about finding that kind of a connection with your sponsor, and I've been very fortunate in that. I've had some really good sponsors along the way, like some really Mike Johnson was my sponsor for a little bit, Charley, and then Mitch, and I want to talk about, that's a pretty good trifecta of sponsors right there,
right?
And but
those 3 good dudes right there.
Yeah. And I could speak
like having Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
All right, let's calm down a little bit here. I don't know if I want to give Mitch that kind of satisfaction.
Mike either. He don't need that.
Right. But man, I can genuinely say that I think God knew I needed that, and I get that sense from you too, as you're talking about that relationship developing with Charley. It's crazy, we find a sponsor to work the program, but I know I could speak for the 3 of us here that in our respective sponsors, we found people to do life with. Yeah. And I cringe a little bit when I say that phrase, because that was such like a early 2000s churchy thing to say, was like, we got to do life together. But no, I mean, this is the real deal. And you'll find that all over CR. And it doesn't matter which CR you go to, you're going to find something like that. And man, when I think about what the church is supposed to look like in general, I think about those relationships, like what you had with Charlie and you had with Charlie and
Yeah.
what I had with Mitch, or what I have with Mitch and all the guys. I mean,
It's relational discipleship.
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, there's no greater impact, I think, in the kingdom than those kinds of relationships, because those are the ones, like you said, and this actually segues perfect. And what I wanted to ask you next was, he was like a father figure for you, and he taught you how to be a man, and that's not something you go into recovery looking for. But what a lot of us find out as we start working our programs, especially for you and I,
Yeah.
being like younger, and I know for you too. I'm not excluding you, Daryl,
No.
but you know, like, I know that for me, just getting sober was just the beginning.
Oh yeah.
And then from there, it was like, how do I live life as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as a brother, as an employee? Everything, every aspect of my life, I had to learn how to live in a healthy way. And so I know for you that as men, we need somebody to impart. There's something so vital in it, about this father imparting to his son kind of part, as being specifically a boy. I can't speak to being a girl, because I was gonna say no. We'll keep it on point. But it's vital. You need somebody like that. And so for you, what was he like in that aspect of your relationship?
So yeah, I've referred to him as the song I sang at his funeral actually talked about that before, like him being a spiritual father to me. And I just want to preface this by saying this is nothing against my dad. I love you, Dad,
Sure.
if you're listening to this. And this is a conversation Charlie and I had talked about. But Charlie taught me things that my dad never taught me because he didn't know them. My dad wasn't an addict. He didn't struggle in the same kind of way that I struggled.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to connect with Charlie on some things that my dad just didn't have experience with. And he didn't know how to reach out and help me because he'd never walked through that. But because Charlie came from a life full of addiction and trauma and pain, and just he was able to connect with me in a way that I've never connected with anyone in my whole life. So yeah, it was just like, I mean, I was chuckling, Daryl, when you're talking about the pushback, like you're sharing inventory and you push back on something. I mean, I remember I was 21. I was something else, man. Running my mouth all the time. Just, I was fired up, and we would cuss each other out sometimes, man. Cause he'd tell me something and be like, F you. Like and he would give it right back. But then I knew he was right. Like 3 days later, I'd sit on it. I'm calling back like, yeah, you were right. Absolutely right. And it was just it was powerful, because I remember the first time I shared inventory with him. Like, that was my first time ever writing an inventory, first of all. Mm-hmm. And even though I wrote it, there were some things on there I wasn't going to share. I was going to hold some of those things to myself. And I remember we went through the whole big book in his old Dakota. We were both smoking cigarettes at the time. And so we just chain smoke cigarettes in this old Dakota and just sit there and read the big book and pray and talk about life. And I mean, when I got done with my inventory, I had like 120 something things on my first inventory. I mean, it was extensive. And so we met. It wasn't like a one-time thing. Like, we met for like 3 hours here, 3 hours again, 3 hours again. And we just sit there and he'd just listen. And I remember the first time I shared, he just came right out of the gate and told me like 3 or 4 things that were like, oh my goodness. Like the worst stuff he ever did. The most terrible stuff he'd ever experienced. He just came right out with no prompting. He just came right out and said it. And it started this relationship. And I've talked about this before, but he was the first person I ever trusted completely with everything. Like, for a long time in my life up until that point, I had just lived putting on these masks and showing a little bit of myself here and maybe a little bit more here, but never really letting anybody know who I really was, like all the way deep down in my heart. Because I felt like if they knew who I was, they weren't going to accept me. They weren't going to like me. They weren't going to approve of me. And he just obliterated that idea. He just laid all that stuff out on the table. And I was able to open up and share these things that I thought I was going to go to my grave with. And he didn't judge me at all. And it wasn't that pretend thing like, oh, it's a judgment-free zone. Like, no, he didn't judge me one bit. He just loved me. And he saw things in me that I was incapable of seeing in myself, like you were talking about at the beginning. And so he just, when I say he scooped me up, like I was sitting here thinking about what I meant when I said that. Like, it's kind of like that shepherding the flock thing that you're talking about. Like, he just like took me under his wing and step by step, little by little, life experience through life experience, he kept pointing me back to the Lord. That's ultimately what he did. And on my shirt right here, it's everything I need is in the presence of God, every single thing. He would harp on that and beat it into my head, because it doesn't matter what the problem is. The answer is in God's presence. The answer is that relationship with him. And so no matter what I was going through, whatever season of life I was going through, whatever I was facing, he would not only come alongside me, but he'd come alongside me and steer me back to the Lord. And so when I say he was like a spiritual father to me, it was just like he was teaching me how to walk with God. He was teaching me how to hear God's voice. He was teaching me how to obey and to submit and to serve and to love and to give of yourself by his example. It wasn't even his words most of the time. I mean, yes, like we have all the Charleyisms and all the things he said, and like those will never, I just had so many in my head just sitting here listening to you talk, Daryl, like just popping out like every time you said something. But more than his words, it was the way that he lived. It was the way he carried himself. It's the way he sacrificed his time and his energy and out of a genuine, honest place of love, because he cared. And that was powerful for me, especially when I was first getting clean. It was just like, that was foreign. I had never seen anything like that. It didn't make sense to me. Like, why does this guy always answer the phone when I call him? Why does he talk to me for an hour? Like, didn't he have better things to do? Like, and it left this impact on me. Like, man, that's love. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
No, that's perfect.
But, yeah, that's kind of what it meant. Yeah.
Because I think for me, like my dad wasn't around, so anything that I've learned on, as I've grown up and become a father and a husband, and not in that order, but whatever. Make sure Natalie doesn't come up later like, hey, you might want to like. I'm like, in my professional life, and what does it look like to be a man? And because I think I know for me, I had this desire to figure out what I had to offer the world, and I was living in this. We all live in this world that is kind of driven by negativity, and it's super easy to become nihilistic and cynical and just defeated and just kind of pack it in and seek comfort and just whatever is going to kind of like numb me to the process till I get through, and then one day I'll die. Problem with us and as addicts is that tends to involve things that will make us die a lot sooner. So, but a lot of us, whether we realize it or not, are not ready to throw in the towel quite yet. And so as you get sober, then you're like, you're kind of forced with it, like as a, and I'm speaking from my experience, and I'm kind of speaking general, but I feel like this is not uncommon. Is that especially for somebody like where I was at in my life was like, I'm like, I feel like I have a responsibility to offer something positive to the world, and something positive. And by the world, I mean to the people around me. Like, what do I do? At some point, I figured out that to be a man, what I think makes a man is, despite what the odds are against you, that you find a way to be a net positive to the people that you care about. Doesn't mean you're perfect. Doesn't mean that you're not going to do things that cause harm or that are negative. But when I leave this earth, am I going to have a legacy left behind that I did something good? Because when I'm gone, I want my children to have that. And I want the people I cared about to remember me as somebody that cared, that gave a damn in a world where it's real easy not to give a damn. And Charley was one of those people that, I was talking with Mitch about this. I'm like, man, I think all of us in recovery, we should all be striving to leave the kind of legacy that he left.
Yep.
Because the most important part about that legacy was not Charley Hartman. It was Charley Hartman, the person that always pointed you to Jesus.
Yeah.
And that was the thing about Charley, is that he even had an ism, and I'll let you guys share it because I know you both know it verbatim about being put on a pedestal. And what was that? What would you say? You can share it. Listen, this is a judgment. This really is a judgment-free zone. So you can say it exactly how he said it.
Give me that. All right, yeah. Don't you dare put me on a pedestal or I'll show you my ass.
Yep. And I want to leave the kind of legacy that when I leave, people know that whatever I did, anything good in the world, was because of Jesus. And to me, that's what it means to be a man. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that when you say that he taught me how to be a man, I think that's what drove that. And that's kind of what you said. It was like, no matter whatever conversation we had, he pointed me back to Jesus. And I think that's why as bittersweet as it is to think that, like, we know that he's with his creator. We know that he's supremely happy in a way that we all strive to be one day. It hurts. It hurt. I know, especially for you two and for many other people, because I wish it weren't the reality that guys like Charley are not common. I feel like.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was sitting here thinking about Charley at his funeral when, because for a while we wasn't sure, because he had sisters that lived down in Kentucky, and so we wasn't sure if the funeral was going to be up here or down there. I knew for sure that there was going to be a crap ton of people that were going to be going down there if that's where the funeral was. So I was really grateful when his family agreed to have the funeral up here, even though he'd only been up here for 5 years. But I was grateful because, and I even said this to Julie, I said, his family needs to know the impact that he had on this city. And, because when, you take a guy like Charley, and it's funny because in the recovery community, he's like, superhero status, but to the rest of the world, he's just Clark Kent. Nobody knows the impact that he's having. And how he's affecting people's lives. And so I vividly remember walking up on that stage at his funeral and meeting his sisters for the first time, and his sisters and his brother-in-law. And I just said, listen, I want to thank you for allowing this to take place up here. And more than anything, I wanted you guys to see the impact that your little brother had on this city. And I can promise you that what you see here, you're going to hear this a lot today. Charley had an amazing effect on my life. But this is not just the effect that he had in this church. What you're going to see is the effect that he had in this city, because you're going to see pastors from other churches. You're going to see parishioners from other churches. He did a remarkable work in this city, and it was because God worked through him.
Yeah. And so I think that's what I mean when I say that when I leave this earth, whatever circumstance that is, if I could have a fraction of that, not for me, just because I would know that sorry. When I was at my darkest, there were a handful of people that gave me hope because I wanted, at my darkest point, I wanted to die, and I wanted to give up on myself so bad that I wanted to write off recovery, but I couldn't write off recovery because then I'd have to write off God, and I couldn't write off God because I thought about people like Charlie, like Randy, like you, Daryl, and there were so many people. When I talk about that legacy, I don't think any of those. I don't think. I mean, you're sitting right here. I don't think you had in those moments you couldn't have known that I thought about what God was doing in your life. That was so unmistakable that I couldn't give up on God. Like, what I want people to think about, I feel as though my life will not have been wasted if I could be one of those people.
That's what I strive for. I think about Charlie all the time. I think about the impact that he had, and I just pray that that all of us are used in the way that God used him.
And it's not even, I think Charlie was special, and I just think it was God's path for him that he'd do this, and that he lived his life the way he did, but I think it's attainable. Not, and I want to be careful here, to clearly state what I mean. I'm not saying that I'm not talking about metrics here in terms of quantity. I'm talking about in terms of impact. That if one person is we can open ourselves up to what God has for us enough that one person sees what God's done in our life and it points them to Jesus, that makes it worth it. I mean, that was the entire mission of this podcast before we started, is that if I do this and there's one person that is it points them to recovery, and I've set the podcast up to be inclusive of all fellowships, and with that, all approaches to their higher power. But I'm not very veiled in the sense that I am very, very outspoken about who my higher power is, and so is pretty much everybody who's been on. But that was the thought, was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I felt like a toddler with the Fisher Price playset, except for it costed me a lot of money. Not a lot, but what I'm saying. And I'm like, I don't know if anybody's going to hear this. I don't know if it's going to make an impact. And then it's done more than I thought. And you guys are a part of that. And so it was only fitting to me that we talk about Charlie on this, because he for sure would have been on here. Maybe the first person on here but man.
It's funny, before I came here, we were, I came here in the morning for the meeting at Saturday morning at the village church. And a bunch of us, about 10 of us, went to Bob Evans afterwards for the meeting after the meeting, which I was sharing with everybody this morning that, we don't do that a lot in CR, at least the CRs that I attend. But when I was getting clean and sober, I loved the meeting after the meeting. I couldn't wait. Sometimes I loved my home group, but sometimes it was like, man, when is this meeting going to be over so we can go have the meeting after the meeting? Because that's really when there was so much healing that took place. And I made the comment that because somebody had said something, I forget now what triggered this thought in my mind, but the thought was that we really never know the impact that we're having on someone, but just being here and just toughing out one more day when you feel like throwing in the towel and you feel like giving in, just the fact that you don't give in and you don't think anybody's watching, you just never know somebody said something about an impact that somebody had and they were pretty sure that they didn't know that they had that impact. And so I think that's part of what we do in recovery. It's called, carrying the hope.
Carrying the message, man.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I'm going to go ahead and go on a limb here and say I don't think it's a coincidence that we call them fellowships, because without the fellowship of these recovery programs, that none of this happens, right? And so, kind of alluding to what you said, Daryl, about the meeting after the meeting, the meetings that we have for Celebrate Recovery or AA, they're vital parts of the recovery process, but the real work tends to happen in the relationships that are formed out of it. And that's where the Charley had his biggest impact was, and it's incredible to me the amount of relationships that he had, because as a capacity as a person, I'm just like, I don't know how he did it. And the man, his sole purpose in life was recovery. And that's what I'm saying. He was special in the sense that, like, he was just, God had put it, this is what you're gonna do for my kingdom.
He was anointed to do it, man.
Yeah.
He had to have been, because I mean, the weight of that, carrying that, listening to people's stuff day in and day out. There's no way he could have done that on his own strength.
Right. But at on the same hand, for as impactful as Charley was, I think the hope that we take from that is just the conversation we've had about, the comment I made just about you being one of the people that I thought of, is that when you see somebody like Charley and you think it's this immeasurable goal that you can't reach, no, it's not the way it is. In recovery, you don't know who's watching you, to the point that I don't think you would have ever thought in our interaction that we had with each other, because you and I weren't, like, we were in a step study together, but I wasn't even, I went out it took me I was a slow learner. It took me a while.
So Charley was in that step study.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I didn't even think about that into the time. But the point being, though, is that if you're sometimes you get stuck in the day-to-day, and it all becomes kind of this going through the motions process. And sometimes we don't know the impact until we can't see it until somebody brings it up, or we might never know. There's plenty of people that I'm sure that you guys have impacted that will never, you'll never hear about, but it doesn't mean the impact didn't happen. And the evidence of that being that, I mean, there was a short list of people that I thought about when I was in that dark period, and you were one of them, and you probably had no idea. And you even brought up something in the podcast we did last time where when you were struggling with things, and you're like, I will never forget the time that you just said, hey, let's stop the meeting and pray for this man.
I did. I actually just shared that. I think it was maybe a week or two ago. I just shared that. So just to set the stage, we were in a step study, and it was the first step study that Charley had ever done with CR. It was the first official one that I had done. I was in a step study, but we weren't doing it right, because none of us, I didn't know how to do CR. So it was really the first official step study. Matt was in it. Charley was in it. Several people that are still around were in it. And I don't know what I said, but I shared something with one of my answers, and it must have just there must have just been an enormous amount of pain that leaked out in my answer. Matt picked up on it, and he just said, guys, can we just stop and just, you didn't even know my name. He said, can we just circle around this guy and just pray for him? And I'll never forget that. That was, I was, you were struggling at that time, but yet God was still using you in a way that I'm sure you didn't even realize.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when you told me, because I didn't even remember that it happened until you told me, and I was sober, and that was 6-7 years ago, probably, if not longer than that.
Yeah, it was in 2017.
Yeah.
26. I think we started in 2016 to finish in 2017. It was a long step study.
Yeah, it was like a 5-year step study. It was we
Marathon
still
step study.
Yeah.
So that's the marathon step study Charlie talked about.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. I think it was like
that step
16
study
months or something.
I heard about that.
still
I heard about
that
that
is-
step study every.
Yeah, that is
Oh,
still
man.
the mark. So it's funny is that your podcast episode is my watermark for this is the longest episode I've had
man.
so far. We still joke about in CR at the Village and the people that have, I'm sure talk about it who are at Rivers Crossing now that like that is when we think about like the step study that like took the longest, that was that one. And
Right.
Yeah.
but it goes to show like I struggled for so long after that, that I didn't even remember it, but it stuck with me of like, man, that's a God thing because I know where I was in that time, and I don't know what prompted. I remember it now because you brought it up, but
Well, I kept thinking that I needed to share that with you, and I hadn't shared it with you. And I remember when I shared it with you, it was the night that you got your 1-year coin,
Yeah.
and I shared it in small group that night.
it was such God
That's
is
powerful.
God is part of the unraveling process where God, for me, and I know He does this with a lot of people, is He took all of the misconceptions and sometimes just downright lies I had about myself, and that's been the main theme of this past, I would say, year of my recovery has been Him taking all of these lies I thought about myself and pulling them back. I'm like, no. As terrible of a person as I had given into, and I was at the time that I finally got sober at my worst. The fact is that was not ever what God had. That is not the person God ever intended me to be, and He was with me even then. And I didn't realize how impactful it was for God to bring things to either remind me of things that happened from my really dark times that He was working when I didn't see it. I did not realize how much that was going to give me hope now. And that was one of those things when you brought it up, I'm like, I know that wasn't me because I wasn't in a place to know to do that, and it was humbling in the best way possible. Cause it was like, if you can use me then I know you can use me now.
Right.
And
You just show up and let God show off.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
So I wanted to, I know this might be hard, and I'm not sure how to frame this. I don't want to be too on the nose with it, but I'm struggling to find a way to frame this other than I think it's important. It's important to people to know what the impact that Charlie had on you guys. And you guys are just a small sample size of the larger work that God did through Charlie's life. I'm not trying to be too on the nose, but I think the best way to ask it would be, Charlie's death was so sudden, and I'm sure that you guys had moments where you were able to express what he meant to you then. But as you're standing here now, sitting across this table from me, if this were Charlie in this seat instead of me, what would you say to him? What would you, if you had a chance to just tell him, man, this is what you meant to me? What do you think you would say to Charlie? And take your time. Like I'm not trying to put you too much on the spot here, but
I would probably say that I don't know how I would have made it through 2016 and which was the year I met him, in 2017, without him. And then 2019, when my son passed away. I mean, he was there for some pretty dark times, in my life. And one of the things I think probably the biggest impact that he had on me, and I still have this picture. I mean, and we've said it a dozen times here, he always pointed everybody back to Jesus. And he was not the typical Jesus guy, I mean, he was he was the atypical guy. He was, you know,
gruff.
he was
He was
gruff
rough,
and he
yeah.
cussed and he, you know, he would just, he was not the guy that you would expect for God to use in such a powerful way. You know, I kind of imagine maybe John the Baptist might have been a little bit like that. You know, or it's just that, you know, that this gruff character. You know, but he had such a passion. I think he said that he was 16 years clean and sober before he ever came to Christ.
I think it was 18.
Was it 18? Yeah.
He was 18.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it was, I mean, he had a lot of sobriety before he actually surrendered to Jesus Christ. And so, you know, by that point in your recovery, you think that, you know, things have kind of leveled out, but then you see the trajectory that whatever was going on at that time, where he ended at was so tremendously above wherever that, you know, wherever he started his journey with Christ. And I still, you know, that picture, and I think it's still on his Facebook page or somebody's Facebook page, I think it's his, of him worshiping.
Mm-hmm.
And him with
Arms stretched wide.
both arms just up in the air as high as he could get. He was a tall guy. He was like, you know, I don't know, 6'17" or something. He was a big man, you know, and he's got this gruff, you know, Bronx accent, you know. And I heard somebody in a meeting one time say that he was pretty sure the Holy Spirit had a Bronx accent. And so, you know, but that was because the Holy Spirit was routinely working through this guy who was just the most unlikely guy to be pointing people to Jesus, but yet he was so over the top. And so sometimes, you know, when I'm tempted to, you know, kind of scale back my faith or the expression of my faith in a public setting or, you know, something like that, I think of Charley. And I think of this big, gigantic guy that just was fearless when it came to his love of Jesus.
It's good. The first thing that came into my mind when you asked that question was I would not be alive today if it weren't for Charley. Like God sent him into my life, and he was the exact person to walk me through the journey of getting clean, getting married, becoming a father. I don't think I'd have any of those blessings that I have in my life today. I wouldn't have the relationship that I have with my wife. I wouldn't have my children. I wouldn't have the job that I have if it weren't for him. And I know that it was God working through him. But he played a role in carrying that out, in carrying that message of hope. You know, like, I know I'm not trying to gas myself up here, but I wrote this song for him that I got to sing at his funeral, which was, it was powerful for me.
It was incredible.
I'm actually, I don't know, man. I wrote it the night that I got the news. I was actually out of town, down in Tennessee with my family, and got a call from Adam. And, I mean, dude, I was speechless. And that night I went out with my guitar and I wrote this song for him. And I clung to that song and the words in that song for months because it rocked me when he passed. Like I was not okay. And I was only like 6 months clean again, coming back from a relapse. And some of the lines in that song, like the one, that fire deep inside you burned through this icy heart. And you introduced me to grace and trust in taking a look at my part. You always told me the truth I needed to hear. even when it really pissed me off. And that was kind of like I wrote that song with the heart behind it of what you're asking. Like if you could say all the things, and like I know I could never overestimate the impact that he had on me. And I tried to capture some of those ideas in that. And I mean, dude, it was the first I got done playing that. I had not cried. I was so, like, since I had heard the news, I hadn't cried. I mean, when I got off the phone, Haley started crying immediately. My mom and dad started crying. And I couldn't. I just, like, I couldn't do it. And I got done singing that song at his funeral, and I just burst into tears. And so that has just been, it's been healing for me to reflect on that. And I mean, did I hear his voice in my head still to this day? And I get a chuckle. I see hawks flying. I know. He always said he knew he was in the will of God. He knew he was doing what he was supposed to do if a hawk would swoop by and fly by. I remember the first time we got together, we were sitting in his truck, and this hawk came and just sat and was staring at us. And he said, "We're right where we're supposed to be, boy." And I mean, dude, numerous times over the years, like, stuff would happen. And he said it was just like God's way of telling him, just like, keep doing what you're doing. And I was falling apart a few months ago, and I was on the phone with Mitch. And I look up, and there's just a hawk flying right over my head. And it just sits on a tree right in my backyard. And it's just like, man, like the stuff that he taught me, the stuff that he imparted, the wisdom that he shared through his experience, through his pain, like, that's going to be with me for my whole life. That's going to be stuff I continue to pass on to people. Like, I find myself saying stuff, I can't take credit for it. That's stuff I learned from him. That's stuff I heard from him. Yeah, I would not be sitting here today. That's absolutely 100% true. I would not be sitting here today if it weren't for him.
Well, I want to speak to that song too, because that song was healing for a lot of people. That song was healing for me. I've listened to that song, and we probably ought to put a link to the video because it's on YouTube of that song. And I've played that song for a number of times. As a matter of fact, anytime that I'm telling the story of Charley to somebody that never met Charley, I always send them that link. And so there's been, a bunch of people that have, because cool. I think it was such a beautiful and accurate tribute, and it just, captured the heart of the man. So it was, I think that was a phenomenal tribute. And I always share that with that caveat that I mentioned before. This is a man who had only been in this city for 5 years and didn't know anybody, the one person that he knew when he got up here. I mean, everybody left, went back home, and for a guy in a 5-year stretch of time to plant as many CRs, to have his fingerprints on as many CRs in this city and be, active part, and, sponsoring guys from every walk of life, it's just remarkable.
Yeah.
It's just yay, God, look at look at what he can do,
Yeah. And it just, I didn't expect this conversation to impact me as much as it did. Because, like I said, he was my sponsor for a short while, but I didn't know him to the depth that you guys did. But if there's not anything that, if it's Charley as a character was a character, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was not enough to leave the impact that he left. I think the common denominator in everything we talked about what does it look like? Like, how does somebody leave the mark like they did? It was the fact no matter what he did, no matter what interaction he had, no matter the relationship, the thing that he always did was point you to Jesus. And whether it was somebody like me who knew him for a little bit, or somebody like you guys that knew him for a while, or probably even just the people that only met him a handful of times at CR, I think the takeaway that everybody had was that dude loves Jesus.
Yeah.
I want what he has.
Mm-hmm.
I need more Jesus.
So
I love the T-shirt he used to wear that said, "I don't know how, but I know who."
Yep.
yeah.
That was one of his sayings.
So I think this is the way I'd like to maybe cap this. I think it's important to have it on the record. The Charleyisms.
Oh man.
Oh man, Austin pulled out his phone. And the reason why I think it's important is that you can't talk about Charley without bringing up a Charleyism.
Mm.
And Mitch, my sponsor, is the same way. I don't know if that's just the mark of being a good sponsor. That's like a requirement. Like you have to good isms. You have to have good isms. But Charley or Mitch has a bunch, right? Like the one that I live and die by, especially with my marriage, and it just fits my personality and my personal struggles, is you can be right or you can be happy. And I think about that, especially with my wife. Like you can be right, and the point of that isn't that you can't be happy and right. The point is, for me, was you can be right or you can be. Sometimes being right and telling somebody you're right is not useful. Sometimes patience, sometimes not saying anything is way more impactful than you making sure somebody else knows that you're right about something. And it definitely helps when you're actually wrong. That'll save you some pain.
Yeah,
right.
But these isms are important because they impart an important lesson. So I think we would be amiss if we'd be remiss, whatever the word is. We would be doing a disservice to Charley if we didn't pass on some of his isms. So I'm staring at looking across this table at Austin. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Austin's got a list.
I wanted
Actually,
to shout out Ben Heath. I got this. He put together this thing after Charley's funeral. He took a poll from everybody, had everybody send him Charleyisms, and then stuff that he had pulled from his notes through the years, and he made this this whole document, the Gospel for Knuckleheads. Quotes and wisdom of Charley Hartman.
and knuckleheads, by the way, is what he always called his sponsees.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some
Bunch
truth
of
in all of that.
knuckleheads,
Yeah.
man. And so Ben put together this list, man, and I go back and read this all the time. I mean, there's well over 100 things on here.
You got to send me that.
Yeah, I'll definitely.
So I think you were still out of town when Charley died. So we all, the morning that everybody found out, everybody went to Julie McGuire's house, and there was just dozens of people over there. And so a bunch of us guys were sitting out on her deck, and somebody started talking about Charleyisms, and somebody else had the great idea we need to start recording these. And so we just sat there one afternoon, and a good number of those just come from sitting on Julie's deck and just, coming up with those, just remembering him on the morning of his passing.
I think the most important one is on the shirt you're wearing right now, Austin.
Yeah.
And I'll let you do the honor.
Everything I need can be found in the presence of God. Every single thing.
If that's not the theme of Charley's life, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
But let's and I want the good ones too, man. I don't
man.
care how uncensored. Mitch has been on this. If Mitch can be on this podcast twice, I don't think there's anything that we can't say.
That's good stuff. Oh man, I'm trying to scroll through here. I definitely had some personal favorites, but here's one. Everyone wants a savior, few want a Lord.
And Daryl, if you ever want to jump in, if you got some off the top of your head,
go ahead.
you want
Go
to
ahead
throw
and
in.
get some.
So yeah, I mean the one I'll tell you the one that he told me one time, and it jarred me. I was not expecting this, but I had called him one time, and I just had really just a knucklehead moment that I was just I couldn't believe that I had done this thing, and I called him, and as soon as he answered the phone, I start crying, because it was something that really bothered me, and I was leading a ministry at the time, and that was kind of what I was saying is that this is not something that ministry leaders should be doing, and he said let me tell you something, D. He says Jesus doesn't give a shit about your righteousness.
Yeah.
He says it's not his plan to use your righteousness. It never was, or something like that. And
Yeah. He wants your brokenness.
yeah, and that's not the thing that I was expecting to have him say, and but yet there's some truth to that it's really, because I think Charley was speaking to the fact that I was broken at the moment, and that I didn't need to be. I didn't need to become my own worst enemy at that point. That Jesus had paid the price for that as well.
Right. It's a good one.
That's really good. If you're upset, there's something wrong with you. You can't kill self with self.
Mm.
Let's see. How's that working out for you? God won't co-shine your bullshit. The beast is in the cage, but the door is not locked.
Yep.
Jesus keeps it closed.
Man, that's a good one.
I have used that one a number of times.
Yeah, Mitch's version of that is I might be in this recovery meeting, but my alcoholism is
Doing
push-ups by my truck right now.
Yeah.
And
I've used that same one, but I've modified it just a little bit. That the beast is in the cage, meaning your addiction. If one is too many and 1,000 never enough, and once you unleash that cage, that beast, it's hard to get in. But he would say, the beast is in the cage, but the cage is not locked, or Jesus keeps it shut. And I just modify that to say that the cage is only locked from the inside. The beast can't get out unless we let him out.
That's good. Write some damn inventory, boy. Are you done yet? Oh, man, he'd hit me with that all the time. I'd be bitching and moaning and complaining, talking about it. Are you done yet? Let's talk about the solution.
right.
Here's one of my personal favorites. I heard this one a lot. I don't give a fuck how you feel. What are you going to do about it? You've got to act your way into a better way of thinking.
I know you know, now do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. That's a good one, too. God has used every single thing I've been through in my life to help somebody else.
You're okay even when you don't feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
These are just the ones. I don't have the list in front of me, but those are ones that are popping into my mind.
If you don't mind, I'd like to actually just figure out a way to link this to the episode.
That'd be sweet. Character is not built in comfort. God is way more concerned with your character than he is your comfort. You can't transmit something you haven't got. The closer I am to Jesus, the less I sin. If you have 1 foot in yesterday and 1 foot in tomorrow, you're pissing all over today. Dude. This is 8 pages long, so we can definitely link that in the description.
But I definitely think the most important one is the one that's on your shirt right now, man. Everything I need can be found in the presence of God. Every single thing.
Well, I just noticed that one of them that you just read is on your arm.
I tattooed it on my arm, man.
Yeah. Character over comfort.
This tattoo right here, too, that was a Charley quote. I mean, obviously not. That's in Hebrew, but it says perspective in Hebrew because he told me my first time through the steps, like, your circumstances don't have to change for you to find peace. All that needs to change is your perspective on those circumstances. And that just, that blew my mind. I mean, and I still live like I tattooed it on my arm. I look at it every time. I'm like,
No, I can't forget it.
yeah. It's like, I mean, all my tattoos are just reminders. I'm not real smart, so I just put stuff I need to remember on my arms.
I'm just trying to imagine Charlie speaking Hebrew. Well, man,
Yeah, with
listen,
the Bronx accent.
I really appreciate you guys doing this, and Charlie's missed in a big way, and thank you guys for doing this, and thank you everybody who's listening. Please, if you have not listened to Austin and Daryl's episode, you don't know what you're missing. Go check it out. It is. I promise you, it is worth your time. So, with that said, stay tuned in this episode because we're not done. And yeah, thanks.